We played sports at Crippled Children's, wheelchair sports, of course, and the rules there are kind of different, and we follow the rules that we followed. For example, in football or basketball, particularly basketball, you could only use two extremities. In other words, to both push yourself and handle the ball. So if you were pushing yourself with both hands, you obviously couldn't. You could, if you were just rolling, you could have the ball on your lap, but you couldn't be pushing yourself with the ball on your lap because you had to dribble or pass, just like any other place, any other rules. And so, and even if you were someone who could use their feet at all or completely, you couldn't use your feet and your arms at the same time. Now, for example, my friend Keith he couldn't really use his right arm, but he could use his left arm and then one leg, but not both legs. So, and if we played, which we normally played kind of exhibition games with teams from around town, and we would play, like, for example, we'd play the Augustana and or Sioux Falls College football team and basketball team and football, mostly because they, depending upon what the teams were, they didn't want to end up getting damaged or hurt or something in a wheelchair game when they were supposed to be playing regular games and stuff like that. So it was more off-season a bit for them. And but when they would play basketball, for example, they couldn't use both their legs and both their arms, and that only made sense. Some other things about it. Football, and we always, every year we played the staff, both in football and basketball, in one game, usually in an afternoon. I have to say those games were kind of hardcore. Even though football was tag football, it really wasn't played that way so much with the staff. And I remember one time in particular that I had surgery, and I was a rusher, and I had had a cast on my leg and a board that held my leg out straight, so kind of like a battering ram, and I kind of used it that way. And I still recall one of the people that worked there, one of the workers, Bill, I won't say his last name, but anyway, he wasn't necessarily one of my favorites. He wasn't someone I disliked exactly either, but anyway, he was rushing, and I happened to catch him at just the right angle and started pushing him over, and I just kept going until he finally jumped out of his chair before it folded up on him. And that really is kind of indicative of how those games went. They were pretty tough. One of the things in football is I would often be the center, and in wheelchair football, the center faces the quarterback, and everybody else faces the other team. And one of the things that we would do, Elvis Tail, who was very athletic, and I am not, I never was, and don't pretend to be, so I would toss him or hand him the football when he hike it to him. And then a lot of times, normally, we had this worked out, I would just sit there and not do anything. And after a while, the other blockers and stuff, or the rushers on the other team, and I would kind of bump into one of them once in a while if they were coming by, or if it looked like they're really going to get Elvis, which they generally weren't. But basically, I would just kind of sit there like a lump. And we had worked this out, because what would happen about once or twice in the game, there would come a time when we were in a critical play, and I would just be sitting there, and nobody really guarding me. I would hand Elvis the football for the hike. He would hand it back to me, or pass it back to me, and then give me a push backwards. And then by the time anybody realized, I'd flip around and be going full the other way. And I more than once often made a 1st and 10, and a few times actually made a touchdown, and more than once a actual game-winning touchdown, the one that made the difference. Basketball, because of how my shoulders are and stuff, I was never very good at shooting baskets, but I could hit them sometimes, but not really very good. I have to shoot one-handed, and it was kind of difficult to do, and especially when you're rolling in a wheelchair. And I do remember one time we had an out of the game, and Elvis was actually pretty good at helping me trying to score some points. Actually, he would pass me the ball and tell me to shoot all the time and stuff, and and I did sometimes, and I did make a few points here and there. One of the things with basketball is every year we got to have one away game, usually actually two out of town, but one where we'd stay overnight. And the one was when I was a senior. By the way, we had not lost a game that year, and it was our last game, and it was up in Iroquois, South Dakota, which is by Huron. And after the game, we got to go stay in Huron at the Plains Motel. And so we were, and luckily our room was kind of way on the other side of the hotel from where the staff members and most of the other team was. But there was four of us seniors in the one room, and it was me, Dean Hansen, and Richard Hettich, and Jerry Bordeaux. And was kind of an interesting thing. Of course, we had to share beds, and I was sharing with Dean, and Jerry and Richard were sharing. And Jerry was one of those guys. He just had teased Richard mercilessly, and he kept saying, making kissing noises and stuff like, just being guys, how guys are. And Richard got all upset, and then so he was going to sleep in the chair in his underwear, which I thought was kind of weird. If you're so worried about that, just leave your pants on or something weirdo. But he didn't. He was just in his underwear on the chair, and he got all upset. And Jerry's like, "Oh, come on, I was just teasing." And finally, and they got anyway, Richard got mad and got stomping around and stuff, and somehow he got locked out of the room. And this was at about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was about 10 degrees outside. And Jerry wouldn't let him back in for a while. And he's out there pounding on the door in his underwear. And he finally did let him back in and stuff. As far as I know, the staff never knew about any of that. But it was one of those things. My point here is that, you know what? We just were kids. We're just like other kids. We were in high school, we did things and got into trouble or didn't get caught, but really we were just another bunch of kids doing things maybe that we shouldn't have, but just being kids.